How much faster is the fanless M2 MacBook Air compared to my $15,000 Mac Pro in real world tasks? Well, today I think your guys' minds will be blown. It's been about a year and a half since Apple Silicon came out, and there have been a lot of optimizations finally for these new systems. So not only are you gonna look at a few benchmarks just to show you guys benchmarks versus reality, but all of those real world tasks and tests. Now, this thing came out just over 2 years ago and it had a crazy price tag. Here's the full spec sheet side by side. And it was a killer machine when it came out. There was no other Mac that even touched it for video editing, which is why we got one. But now nobody wants to buy it. I've had it listed everywhere multiple times. People don't want it because they rather buy an Apple Silicon machine, and I don't blame them. The one that I use for this comparison is the one that we recommend most. It has the 8-core GPU, not the 10-core, and 16 gigs of RAM with SSDs that are full speed, the 512 model. So we're looking at $1,600 compared to almost $15,000 if you buy the RAM from Apple. Now, I saved a little bit because I bought it myself, and this thing also has the Afterburner card, which we are gonna talk about. It's gonna be interesting. Now, I wanna give you guys a few benchmarks just to show you guys the raw performance and then what happens with Apple Silicon and optimization. So in Cinebench, our 10-minute stress test gave us about 8,000 on the MacBook Air compared to over 14,000. That's 76% higher score for the Mac Pro in terms of raw performance. Now, if you guys didn't see my laptop cooler video, you have to. It was amazing. Not only did we test out a MagSafe fan, but also a laptop cooler. And with that, we actually got 8,300 consistently without any more throttling compared to about 7,300 if you leave it fanless. So the Mac Pro's 12-core CPU is 76% more powerful, but it does require 9.6 times more power at the peak. That gives us 73 Cinebench score per watt compared to 400 on the MacBook Air. And with the MacBook Air, once it starts throttling down, its efficiency actually goes up a lot. I did another video about low power mode and how fast and cool it runs. Another great one to watch. I'll link it at the end. Now, as far as Geekbench, the single core score is 73% higher on the MacBook Air, while the multi-core score is 44% higher on the Mac Pro. So less of a difference for those quick, snappy tasks, even in multi-core. As far as graphics, the Mac Pro is about 4 times more powerful in metal compute tasks. That is a massive difference. And that's compared to the 8-core, the 10-core we don't recommend. We tested it out, it does throttle quite a bit and it can slow down when you need that extra performance. So the Mac Pro is a lot more powerful, but what happens for your daily simple tasks? Well, first off, in Speedometer 2.0, the M2 Air scores 2.5 times more points, and it is way faster for day-to-day browsing. When I'm on my Mac Pro, I notice how everything is slower. It is crazy. Now, not only that, we were compressing files, decompressing, and for Xcode, the M2 Air was 20% faster at compressing that application and all those tiny files. Now, when we decompress that, it is actually 45% faster, and that's with both using the same Mac OS. Another thing we do all the time is denoising our audio recordings for our YouTube videos. The Mac Pro took 45 seconds compared to just 26 on the M2 MacBook Air, so that's 42% faster. And get this, that is using Rosetta because this app is still written for Intel CPUs. That is crazy. So pretty much every day-to-day simple task is much snappier with this fanless laptop. But what about tougher tasks? Because that's what the Mac Pro is for. Well, as far as pure graphics gaming performance, which we don't really game on it, but this thing's really capable and it was when it came out, the Mac Pro scored 2.25 times more frames per second than the M2 MacBook Air, which of course is fanless, and we have the binned graphics. Now to do that, the Mac Pro took over 22 times more wattage and power for the graphics to achieve the FPS, which means that the M2 MacBook Air is way more efficient, of course. It gets over 8 frames per second per watt compared to less than 1. Now, of course, this thing is plugged in. It's meant to suck a lot of power for things like Blender, where you really need those high performance graphics. And that's exactly what it did. It was over 3 times faster in our classroom scene. And with that Xeon processor being super stable, it destroys in Logic Pro. It can handle a ton of tracks, and with that, we also have a ton of RAM capability in here. We have 192. You can go up to 1.5 terabytes with higher processors, compared to up to 24 gigabytes on the M2 MacBook Air. So it is definitely a killer for doing really high-end stuff. Now, as far as coding, this was very interesting. Not only does it sip power, but it was actually faster than this Mac Pro at our standard project that you could test out for yourself as well. This is where Apple's silicon software optimization really kicks in, because there's no way that the M2 Air should be faster in processing code. But if an application's optimized, it is insanely quick. And moving along into photo editing with Photoshop, the M2 also has the neural engine that can speed stuff up. I processed 9 images for HDR, and the M2 MacBook Air was 34% faster. Now, some people do more images or they have bigger differences, or I know people that do this all day for real estate photography, and it's crazy that this laptop can replace and beat out a high-end Intel Mac desktop. That is insane. Now, check out this next one, running a 10-image panorama where Photoshop does all the processing for you. The M2 Air was more than twice as fast. It was insanely quick, and it's just mind-blowing looking at the raw performance versus actual real-world tasks that people do. Now, when I saw these Photoshop results, I was like, man, that is incredible. What about for Lightroom? There's a lot of people that use it for processing batches of images, and I started testing it out, and then my mind was blown because the Mac Pro was flying. For example, exporting our 50 42 megapixel edited images to JPEG, the Mac Pro took 1 minute and 11 seconds previously, which was way faster than all the other Intel Macs. Even the iMac Pros, this thing, because of its 6-channel memory, just flew way beyond the raw performance. Now in 2022, the M2 Air took 1 minute and 10 seconds, meaning that it's just insanely faster than everything else out there. But get this, the Apple Silicon Macs were not the only ones that people are optimizing it for. Adobe enabled GPU rendering for images. I think they redid the engine, and now this Mac Pro with this beefy graphics card did it in 32 seconds. So more than twice as fast. And that just shows that for some people, having these high-end graphics, it's still gonna make a big difference, especially if you're doing this all day for your main job or your business. Now, Apple really focused on the media engines in the M2 chip, and they surprised us with ProRes decoding and encoding. So this thing is actually quite capable for video editing, and go ahead and take a look what happens. Stabilizing a 1 minute 4K clip, which we stabilize all the time, was more than twice as fast as this Mac Pro, and that blows my mind what the optimizations have done. Now, exporting a 5-minute HEVC project with effects was also slightly faster, where the Mac Pro used to be by far the quickest. Now, what's crazier is if we use DaVinci Resolve, which recently was updated for this M2 chip, that actually goes down to 1 minute and 32 seconds, beating out the Mac Pro by a lot. Now, the Mac Pro is fully optimized. It can't get any faster, but Final Cut can get faster with future updates. Now, one thing that really got to me about the Mac Pro once I got it was that newer footage like 10-bit 422 would not play smoothly. It would just be super choppy because the system can't handle it. Now, Apple addressed that with their Apple Silicon chips, which were the first that can play back smoothly even on a base M1 MacBook Air. Now, the M2 builds upon it. Apple talked about 8K video, and we started to shoot 8K video for our top angle. That way we can zoom in and show you guys all of the details that are very clear, and it's been great, other than the Mac Pro not being able to play back these 8K HEVC clips, and it's just super choppy. But get this, the M2 MacBook Air plays them back perfectly. Now on the Mac Pro, you have to transcode this footage into another format that's easier to play. And to do 30 minutes of transcoding, it takes 49 minutes. That is a long time to wait to be able to edit these files, whereas the M2, it takes 18 minutes to do the same exact tasks. But of course, you don't even have to do that because it plays back perfectly. Now, as I mentioned, we were shocked that Apple added the ProRes decoders and encoders into a base chip. They had that with the Pro models, and that was fantastic, but now we have it here. So how fast is it? With the Mac Pro, you have the $2,000 afterburner card to do this same thing, whereas here we have a whole laptop with battery, display, everything else for $1,600. So taking our 5-minute ProRes RAW graded project, our MacBook Air plays it back perfectly and it rendered it out in 1 minute and 51 seconds. Now the Mac Pro takes 2 minutes and 45 seconds without the afterburner card. And if you spend that $2,000, it goes down to 1 minute and 45 seconds, just slightly faster than the M2 MacBook Air. Now, as I mentioned, we have the 8-core here. Now we also have the 10-core, which we tested, and for most things it's not really worth it, but for ProRes, it actually speeds it up to 1 minute and 40 seconds, meaning it is faster than the Mac Pro with that afterburner because we are GPU limited in this instance. So that is just so crazy that for a fanless laptop, you could play this footage better and easier than on the Mac Pro. It is incredible. Now, there has to be some areas where the Mac Pro is better. And there are. For example, in DaVinci Resolve, if you're denoising footage, this takes all of the raw graphics power to do. In our MacBook Air, can play this back at only 3 frames per second out of 24, whereas the Mac Pro, it could do it in 18 seconds. So still not perfect, so you might want to render, and it'll be way faster to render on the Mac Pro, but a huge difference because of that raw graphics power. Now, the same thing goes if you are working with 8K crazy footage. The Mac Pro is over 3 times faster at doing this compared to the MacBook Air, and here, of course, it starts thermal throttling a lot. Now, I mentioned that cooling fan that we had with the thermal pads. When we used that on this machine, it went down from 26 minutes, almost 27, down to 19 minutes and 40 seconds. It was actually faster than our M2 MacBook Pro, which really blew our minds. So that does make a really good improvement. Now, overall, yes, the Mac Pro still has its place. You have the PCI cards, you could do dual graphics cards, you could get a lot of RAM, but at this point, for the vast majority of people, the Apple Silicon laptops and the Mac Mini, and the Mac Studio, they make so much sense that unless you need one of the a few small niche features of the Mac Pro, it is just slower in most cases and for what most people do. So there you guys go. If you guys want to buy one of these from me, please reach out. If you do need the PCI slots or something else, I'd be glad to sell it to you for a good deal. And please check out that cooling video where we added a fan and we tested out the laptop cooler on the M2 MacBook Air. It is amazing. Click above to subscribe. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next video.